Okay, so here we go. We've got the connecting rods and bearings onto the crankshaft. Here, as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's what it'll look like if my camera will focus. Yeah. So piston on each one. The next job will be to give a final clean, put the bearing shells in here and here, grease them up, set the crank on, flip the case over, and then, before we do that, we'll have to put the O-rings in, and we'll put the 3-bond sealant around the edge of the block, and an O-ring there, water seal, and around here and around here, and that's what seals the middle of your crankcase. Actually, the sealant will be on these surfaces here. So when you put the two blocks together, that will then seal it. You've also got O-rings, and when you put your case bolts that go through the center as well, basically, let's see, case bolts going in areas like in here through your water jacket. There's a Dowdy O-ring seal on those as well. So everything has its own seal, O-ring, whatever, and the final sealant is just for the metal case halves, the aluminium case halves. So what we'll do, we'll give this a final blast on the bearing surfaces here where the bearings will touch. Final blast here and here. Get that in, prep the block and tighten it up and torque it to spec. And then the next job will be is the pistons. So I'll have to give these a good clean again, obviously, but everything's gapped, pre-gapped, so your compression rings and your oil scraper rings and your wrist pins. So yeah, we're all good. I think we're finally making progress here. Okay, so here's the bearings installed, and what I've done is just made sure that these are called nips and tangs, so you want to make sure that the bearing has the little piece there, and it goes into the hole on the block, and that locates the bearing so it doesn't hopefully spin. It's the same on each side. Just go along, and basically I'm just like feeling by hand. This is kind of what comes down to experience. You want to make sure that these are all flush, so that when you torque it up, everything meets correctly and you don't compress a bearing or do damage. So that's good. Our crankshaft is sitting ready to drop in, so we're going to lubricate these with a bit of assembly lube, set the crank in, and then we'll get ready for the messy bit of the O-rings and let's see what else, O-rings and water seal, Dowdy seals. So good to go. Okay folks, I'm going to do this one-handed. So here you get some assembly lube. Just get it on the bearing there. You don't need too much, but this is just when you fire the engine with the spark plugs out and the fuel pump disengaged, that you can then build up oil pressure off the oil pump with the crank turning, so that you basically build oil pressure, force it around all the oil galleries in the engine, get it through your con rods, get it through these main bearings, so that you're lubricating your crankshaft before you fire the engine. So that's the main key thing, is you want to get oil in and around all the moving parts when there's no load on them. So as you can see, it's not maybe a bit too much there, but again, it doesn't have to be too much. This is also why it's important to do the first oil change very quickly, because that will remove any contaminants from the block, especially you're running in your pre-lube, right? So this is quite high viscosity, sort of oil, grease, whatever, assembly paste. So when you fire your oil pump, you'll get good mineral oil through it, so you run in oil, and that'll then flush these bearings and you'll get normal oil going through them. So as it turns, it'll wipe off this assembly paste that'll end up back through your system and in your sump. And as the block runs in, what you're wanting to do is run it in stages, different RPMs, and then basically you'll have all of this plus any small filings. Depending on how good your hone is, there'll still be tiny particles of cylinder wear, possibly potentially making it back to your sump. That can go around the system because it's smaller than the screen on your oil pump. So what you want to do is get it run in, literally run the thing in, run it up to idle, different RPMs, heat cycle it, and then dump the oil again. And then about the first 50 miles, my trick is I'll run it in on mineral oil. I've got no catalytic converter, so it doesn't really matter. But if you had a cat, you just use normal oil for a petrol engine. If you didn't, let's see, what else? Yeah, basically just run it in on oil, and which is always good. And then do a quick oil change. And then you want to bring it up, say, in stages, different RPMs to get the oil up around the cams and the head. That's what I was trying to say before I'm multitasking here. You get the oil up around the cams, the heads, the bearings, and then after that initial heat cycle, you start doing your running miles. You're bringing it up to 2,000-3,000 RPM, different gears. And then after about 50 miles, do an oil change, and after that then another couple hundred, do an oil change. So by the time you've hit about 1,200 miles and the blocks run in, you've done about 4 oil changes, or it's up to you, but I mean, personally, that's just my preference. So here we go. Okay, so this is the way you gotta have it to get the blocks together. You've got 2 con rods dropping down into the cylinders on this block, and you need 2 sitting up, so that you can flip this block over and they will end up sitting up in the cylinder as well. Okay, so after you lube all your bearings, you want to get these O-rings in here, and these will match up on the equivalent sides on this block here when I flip this over the other way. So then we'll put the 3-bond on all the surfaces. You have to be very careful it doesn't then press in your bearings and squeeze out whenever you put the case halves down. So just gently, lightly lubricate all of these, and this is your sealant surface. Get these done as per the manual, and then I should have it in the manual here somewhere. It does show you where to lubricate them. So just around the edges and all here, and around these holes that the water jacket bolts go through. So that's the next job. Once that 3-bond's on, we'll then quickly lift the crank, set it back in, and get a couple of water jacket bolts through from the top side so it squeezes it all together enough that we can then tighten down and yeah, get get the block torqued up, and that's the bottom end taking shape. So again, folks, I'm going to do this one-handed so you can see. We've got the 3-bond on. I'm just cleaning the area up by hand, taking away the residue, making sure that it's not too heavy. You just want a nice good coating on there. Obviously not touching your bearings, but you want it on the aluminium surface, so kind of get all that rubbed in. And you don't want it to touch your O-rings either. Wow, as best possible. apologies if the camera work isn't so good. I'm more focused on getting a good coating here, and as my trusty viewers, I will never forgive you if I get this wrong. You do have about 15-20 minutes to do this, so don't be feeling like you have to rush. You know, that's the time to get the 3-bond on. And what I'll do here is just clean that back a bit. Some areas have a bit too much, some have a bit too little, so just try and use your better judgment, get it on there. But remember, you are doing this on both sides of the block, so you're going to have a decent enough coating by the time you're finished. This is the area of the water seal on the other side, so you don't really need too much there. It's just maybe it'll help stop the O-ring initially moving when we drop the block on. What I'm trying to do is actually brush away from the bearing side, so put it on here and then flick it back towards the bolt hole. Don't try and sort of creep too much towards the shell. Just get it on. Okay, so we've got all the water jacket bolts in. There you can see one of the connecting rods. There we go, free to wiggle. And what we've done is jacket bolts here and jacket bolts on this side, and also you then put these bolts in here, and there's a cheeky wee one down here and also one on the other side, coupled to at the bottom there. So you basically bolted the case here, along the top end, top and bottom, and in through the middle, and sides. So there's quite a lot of bolts, but that's what the short block looks like, minus the pistons. But the good thing is, this is the point you need to get to, say for example, in one effort. So when I started this morning, I had both case halves on the table. I had my shells out, my con rods. So basically, I would advise you do it in sections so you have a chance to have a tea break, because once you put that sealant on, there's no going back. Also, to minimize the risk, obviously everything has to be perfectly clean. So you've probably seen me in the time lapse. Brake cleaner and compressed air is your friend. Blast everything, make sure it is completely immaculate before you put it in that engine. So what I did was, the first section, I would recommend torque up your rod bolts, get your con rods onto your crankshaft, get that all torqued to spec. You're happy with that, keep it to the side, keep it clean. Then have a cup of tea, whatever, come back or the next day, but that's your first break point. Then your next job will be to do the case halves, put the bearing shells, lubricate your bearing shells, apply your sealant, put your O-rings in the case halves, and then you can lift that clean and beautiful crankshaft and con rods, and obviously line up 2 con rods per cylinder on each side. So when you set it in, 2 will be facing down, 2 will be poking up, and you lift the other case half on top. I couldn't do that really on camera because kind of time was of the essence. I had the sealant on there. But yeah, once you have it on, again, keep going, get those water jacket bolts in, and don't forget to put the Dowdy seals on each bolt. I've actually got a spare set, but that goes on there on the bolt, and then you slide the bolt into the case half. What I did was I snugged them up with the ratchet just to initially get that sealant, and as you can see, some sealant squeezed out because I did apply it quite well around there. That's why you don't want to encroach on your bearing shells with too much sealant. You have to be very, very careful. So once you get all the case bolts in, I got, say for example, the first 10 in through the water jackets, just to sort of compress the case, make sure it's tight, everything fitted. And then I torqued those up to spec, and then as part of the sequence, then you continue on the top, the sides, and the bottom. So basically, once that sealant's dry, once that sealant is drying, you've already torqued your block. Everything is nice and tight, and that's really it. So you can actually just let that sit and dry now and cure, and basically protect the engine. If you want to take a break now, you can. I think I will, because I'm going to put some plastic over this, spray a bit of oil in there just to lubricate the bores again, because obviously I hit everything with brake cleaner earlier. And now I'm just going to clean up all my piston rings one at a time. I'm going to tidy up my work area for a start, and then we go back to the manual, because there is a specific way and angle that you put each piston ring on. So the first ring gap has to be 180 degrees out from the other, so that you don't have all your combustion gas just flying down the same ring gap into your crankcase. You want to make like a labyrinth seal around all the rings on the piston. So that'll be the next job. So cup of coffee, warm up a bit, it is freezing, tidy up the work area, and then we will hit the pistons and rings. So we're now on to the piston assembly. I've given this a really good clean again, and obviously the rings. So going by the manual, what you do is, if this is facing forward, so this is the top of the engine, which would be top of the engine, and also facing forward where the snout of the crank is. So what you do is, the first ring, you want your ring gaps here. So when this is compressed, hopefully I'll do it with the other hand. So there's your first ring gap there on the top rail. Your second ring gap is on the bottom 180 degrees out. And now you have your oil scraper rings. So the first one, the gap, is going to be slightly 25 degrees offset to A. So A was your top ring. So there, so you basically put the top oil scraper ring there. Now, once that's installed, your bottom one is going to be 25 degrees out again from B. So it's about there. And then you have your middle expansion ring, and this will go in between the two on that hole, on that gap on the piston. And it, let's see, it is to fit into, hopefully, if you can see that, there's a little, so your top ring goes into the hole there, then you have your expansion ring, and then the bottom ring. So that's what we're going to do, get it all lubricated and then ready to fit. Okay folks, so one thing I wanted to mention was that if you can see this small mark here, every piston ring, compression rings, will have a dot or a marking like that, and the manufacturer will actually say that that side faces upwards. So again, for this third piston going in, I've set my oil scraper rings. Each ring gap is opposite sides, and then the middle scraper ring is offset. So you've two gaps here, one gap here, and they're offset to the 180 degree offset of the two piston rings, compression rings. So that should give you a good sealing face for the oil scraping and scavenging, and at the same time you've got your good compression as well. So here we go, we've got our gap there and we've got our gap there, 180 degrees apart, all good. Let's get the ring compressor on it and we'll get it in the... Okay, so the ring compressor, I've gently put it over the piston. I'm actually using this tap just to try and get it initially tight because I couldn't find something that fitted this one. Can't really do it one-handed, but if you see, you just keep turning this and that will eventually compress in and compress all the piston gaps so that it's basically, you can then slide it in. So if you can see there, there's the circlip at the back of the piston, the hole through the piston. What I've done is I've pushed the piston down into the bore so that the hole comes out through the piston pin plug hole, and then we can get our wrist pin and slide it in, and it will stop at the back of the circlip. Once that's done, we'll put the second circlip in to stop it coming back out this way, and then we'll get the piston pin plug in, and that's it. The first piston, number one, is in. Okay, so there you go, second pin in. You've got two pins in, the wrist pin in, the piston. Job done, piston number one. So here's number three piston. I'm just going to do that because it saves breaking your back, lifting the block down. Through there, if I will put my finger down, maybe you can't see, sorry, taking away the light source, but that is the con rod bushing. So I've lined it up, and hopefully here's a good demonstration of, there you go. So that's where your piston pin, wrist pin will go through, and everything has to line up, and it was the same on number one. So we'll go and get the piston rings on number three piston, and then we will get everything installed on this side too. So that's just a plug basically that goes on each piston to give you access to install the wrist pin on the block. Okay, so that's the second piston in. So pistons 1 and 3 are in. I've now flipped it up so that the pistons 2 and 4, I've just covered those to take a break. I'll come back later, but so far so good. All the pistons are fitting well, good clearance, block rotates nicely by hand, nice and free, no play. So far so good. Last two remaining pistons later, and then we'll look at the sump, and at the very least I'll get some cling film and wrap the whole block, just to keep it preserved, spray some oil in there, things like that. If I don't really get a chance to finish it now, at least it's really well lubricated, all the bearings, all the machine surfaces, and it's safe to kind of leave then, and the sealant obviously as well is drying off. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. There we go guys, all 4 pistons are in. Maybe you can't see it there, but I've decided to wrap the whole block in cling film, kitchen foil. Basically everything's lubricated, it's all good. I just want to keep these breathers clean. I haven't had a chance to put the piston plugs in yet. Again, I want to get the new gaskets for those. So basically, even underneath here, under the sump, the whole thing is wrapped. Basically it's just keep the dust out for now. But yeah, that's it, all good. So let's see what this makes. Next step will be, we've got some heads, we've got the manifold to clean, TGV deletes, and a general tidy up as well, because the place is a bomb site, to be honest. So yeah, that's next on the cards. But good result for today. Hope you enjoyed this, and we'll keep going next time. Thanks for watching.